The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast.
No, they don't.
Any of the ridiculously thought-provoking content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or Her Supreme Holiness Gwyneth Paltrow.
Goop.
We're just two mortals trying to make a gluten-free, holistically helpful podcast that helps, informs, and entertains, and maybe moisturizes. Silky, silky smooth. Hey everybody, Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story, we met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So those 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wind, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
What up, girl?
How you doing?
Hey, so we are, let's see, about 3 episodes deep in The Vow currently, which we're going to, of course, get more into.
We're still homeless in Atlanta.
Homeless in Atlanta, that's a movie.
Or a podcast, what's it called? When they, like in a show when they have an offshoot, what's that called?
It's called an offshoot.
No, there's another name for it. Like when there's a series and then they do like a side thing.
Spinoff?
Spinoff, yes.
Oh my God. Really? Is that where we are?
This is the effects of being homeless. I am exhausted.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we've made some slight changes to the structure of our podcast, and we'll tell you about that at the end of the episode.
Good changes.
Good
You have
changes,
some wins.
yeah.
You had a dream come true yesterday. Am I correct? Can you say that now? Can you drop
Well,
that?
I can't say it yet because they haven't
Fine, I'll
announced
say it. So,
No,
Sarah,
no.
I'm just kidding.
All I'll say is that I was interviewed by some of my personal heroes in a podcast that I listen to for my own healing, and I cannot wait to share it with y'all.
Pretty sure that was like one of your manifestation things.
Yes, it really was. I've been like visualizing it like one day this will happen, which makes me think it's your turn.
Well, I manifested Troy's playoff win last night.
Oh, did you manifest that?
Oh, hell yeah, dude. I've been manifesting that in my head for years.
I wonder what Amanda Montell would think about this manifesting magical thinking.
I don't know. It sounds like we're Eckhart Tolle right now. You have a segue for us here, or are we just
I
gonna
was
jump
trying
right
to come
into
up with one.
Huh? I know. I can see the wheels turning there. Like
I was like,
the patented Sarah
magical
Edmondson segue.
thinking is a leftover remnant of so many of us recovering from spiritual groups, but so many of us have other things to work through. And that's why we are so excited to have our guest this week,
Nice.
Dr. Marlene Winell,
Yeah.
PhD. She knows all too well that exiting a controlling religion can be a devastating life crisis.
As a college student, she moved away from the fire and brimstone fundamentalist Christianity she was raised in, and the fallout of her exit was so dramatically upending that she felt compelled to dedicate her life's work to studying the very phenomena that she would later coin religious trauma syndrome. She did this to help encapsulate a group of symptoms that arise in response to traumatic or stressful religious experiences.
Today, Dr. Winell is a psychologist, educator, and writer whose background includes 30 years of experience in human services in both community and academic settings. She holds a doctorate in human development and family studies from Penn State University and is the author of Leaving the Fold, A Guide guide for former fundamentalists and others leaving their religion.
Leaving the Fold has become a leading self-help book in the field of religious recovery and examines the effects of authoritarian religions, namely fundamentalist Christianity, on individuals who leave the faith.
She joins us today to discuss religious trauma, recovery, and we cover a few things that will definitely get us uninvited to a few Sunday dinners, and this might get a little triggery for you and may also chap your ass.
I'm thinking the latter.
Sorry about that.
As a side note, we aren't interested on punching down on any religion in this podcast. We are interested in helping people recover when their faith tradition harms them. Our intention is not anti-religion, it's pro-recovery.
So, don't be an asshole. Okay.
Yes.
And while it is not an official diagnosis in the DSM-5, religious trauma syndrome is a common experience shared among many who've escaped cults, fundamentalist religious groups, abusive religious settings, or other painful experiences with religion. And it is gaining traction as a legitimate diagnosis. But again, we're not doctors or therapists.
Without further ado, here's our conversation with Dr. Marlene Winell.
So welcome, Marlene, to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
We heard about you, as you know, through Alice Gretchen, who we interviewed on the podcast, and she kept talking about religious trauma syndrome, which we hadn't really heard of at that point, and then connected us with you, and it seemed like such a natural fit to speak to you as an expert, but also the person who coined the phrase, which is what a neat thing to have coined a phrase in the field.
First question, how does it feel to coin a phrase? That's got to be pretty
Well,
cool.
I did not realize it was going to spread like it did. It really caught on, and I did not know that would happen. And obviously, it was something that people needed. We needed a name for it. And so that was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't think people sit down and go, I'm going to coin a phrase. I think the universe gives it the stamp of approval. So you did something right there.
For those who don't know, can you define it for our audience?
Well, let me just give you a tiny bit of history on it. I had written my book, Leaving the Fold, because I wanted to write something about recovering from religious harm. And this was it was published in 1994. And it was all about what I could see as, well, the first part of the book is describing what I think some of the harms are for religion and how you can understand what the various issues are, because religion gets treated like it's benign, if not helpful, right? Everybody thinks it's a good thing. So I wanted to write about that. And then also some steps in recovery. What can you do about it if this is your situation? And I published with a self-help publisher. So that came out, and that was out for quite a few years. And then as I was working more and more with people that were referred to me for religious trauma, we weren't really calling it religious trauma at the time. It was just recovering from religious harm. But as the years went by, I realized that it was actually more serious than I thought. I was working with ex-evangelicals, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Mormons, the occasional ex-Muslim, and then people from various smaller cults. And not only was it more serious than I thought, but that I thought it qualified as trauma as we were starting to understand trauma. There was a lot of work going on in the trauma field.
When you say it was more common than you thought, what specifically are you saying? The trauma or the abuses that were going on? Like, what's the it?
The trauma,
Okay.
yeah. And even though in my book I wasn't using that word specifically, I was talking about all the various, mostly mental and emotional harm that can be done by a fundamentalist kind of religion. And I was acknowledging that we've known about physical and sexual abuse in religious contexts. The Catholics are famous for that, and cults are famous for sexual abuse. But I wanted to address mental and emotional because I decided that ideas can be hugely powerful and can be abusive, that ideas can permeate your brain, especially things that you teach to a small child, like being afraid of going to hell or being basically bad as a human being, that these are toxic ideas that can get embedded and that can stay with you even when you leave the religion. So it deserves to be called abuse. And so as this went on and I worked with more and more people, I saw a pattern. The symptoms were quite similar across the population of people recovering from religion. And that's actually what a syndrome is. A syndrome is when you have a collection of symptoms that are common to a particular population. Okay. And I know that people have objected to me calling it a syndrome because they're saying that I'm pathologizing it, but I'm not. It's like PTSD, where the symptoms that you have are a logical consequence of the trauma that you've been through. It doesn't mean you're mentally ill in the traditional kind of sense. It means that you are struggling with certain symptoms because of what you've been through. That's what, I mean, if you've been through a car crash or you've been in a war, you have PTSD symptoms. Well, I concluded that there were very common symptoms that applied to people who had been indoctrinated in a fundamentalist kind of religion. And so I actually polled my colleagues to say, what should we call this? And I came up with several names. And we decided that religious trauma syndrome was the best name for it because it got the idea of trauma and it got the idea of syndrome. And what happens when you have a name for something is that people can better understand what's going on. It makes you feel less crazy or like you've made it up yourself or that it's all your fault and nobody understands and you're all alone with it. It helps with all of that. It also helps with training and research if you have a name for something. So we really wanted to do that. And I also concluded that it has two parts. At first, I was just addressing the part of what happens when you lose your religion, when your faith fails you and you feel lost and the rug's been ripped out from under you, your whole sense of reality has changed, you lose your social network, all these traumatic things that can be part of an event. And that's like traditional PTSD, it's part of an event. But then it seemed like some of the trauma actually goes on earlier. It also goes on when you are going through the damage, and it's more like CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic syndrome, where it's like domestic violence or child abuse, where it's going on a daily basis and causing harm to you, and you may not even know it. So I basically defined RTS, religious trauma syndrome, as being both parts. The continuous kind of daily harm that certain religious practices and teachings can do to you, and the event of leaving the religion, the trauma of losing your whole worldview and basically trying to go from one world to another, a religious view of the world to a secular one, and how much trauma that involves. So it's both. And people talk about aspects of each when they talk about growth and healing from it.
We could go a lot of ways there. One of the things I really like hearing is the distinction between a lot of those organizations, when they're held accountable, normally it's a physical abuse that everyone can quantify and understand and go, okay, yeah, that's wrong. And normally the physical abuse is a symptom of the earlier abuses, which you've quantified in a lot of ways, which are harder to quantify. And I imagine it's difficult because the emotional abuses are difficult to quantify, and you get a lot of pushback maybe because people don't want to admit that's what goes on with them and those sorts of things. So putting a name to it, I think, is very important. Commend you for that.
I would love to dive deeper into, because as you're talking, and as you know, with our podcast being a little bit culty and our background being in a cult, but not a religion, I couldn't help but draw many parallels to everything that you said. It's like we could just call it cult trauma syndrome, like it's religious trauma syndrome, because it's the same to me. It's the same in terms of like the CPTSD that I had from the ongoing stress and trauma of being in the cult, and then the trauma of like recognizing I was in a cult, getting out, recovering. And I'd love to dive deeper into that, but I'm also want to remain true to the structure of our podcast, which is we also love to hear about with experts like yourself. What's your backstory, if you don't mind sharing? What was your upbringing? And we always ask our guests when they were in a group or a cult or religion, whatever, how did you get in? Were you born into what your parents had chosen?
Yeah. My parents were Christian missionaries with an evangelical Pentecostal denomination called Assemblies of God. And so they were in China and then Hong Kong, where I was born, and then Taiwan, where I grew up. So I grew up in that and also went to a Christian boarding school that was being run by several different Christian denominations in Taiwan. And so we had Bible study every day. And so I was totally immersed in it. And then when I became a teenager, I started taking it very seriously myself personally and became quite the Jesus freak We moved to Southern California when I was 16, and I got involved with Calvary Chapel, the whole Jesus movement that was going on there, with baptisms at the beach and the beginning of Christian rock and roll, and staying in a commune for a while. We were all very zealous Christians on the beach, trying to witness to other people to get them into the fold because we thought Jesus was coming back any day. So it was pretty important to me, pretty serious. And I had what felt like a personal relationship with Jesus. I've called him my first lover because it was pretty intense. And that went on for a while. And it took me a number of years to pull away from that as I went through college years.
When you were in it and things were good, what were the things that you now know as problematic or red flags or things that you couldn't reconcile at the time?
Well, there's an isolation involved with most of these organizations, and this would be true for the non-religious ones too. There's a lack of information about alternatives. You don't really get exposed to multiple worldviews and multiple social and cultural experiences, or even literature. You are isolated and given a select set of information, basically, and told that that's what's true and everything else is wrong and bad. So you're kind of stunted. You have delayed development in a number of ways. And you're also told to seek your validation in an external way. From the authoritarian approval of God, of the pastor, of the church, of the organization. You're not really allowed to look within for your value, and qualities like wisdom and love and strength and all these things supposedly come from outside of you. You know, you allow God to work through you and that kind of thing. You don't develop a very strong sense of self or sense of identity. And you certainly don't develop very much in the way of critical thinking because your own thoughts can't be trusted. Not only can't you trust your own intelligence, but you can't trust that your ideas are even going to be good or valid or ethical because you're basically evil from birth. I've decided that these fundamentalist religions basically teach two huge assumptions that can affect you for a lifetime. One is you're not okay,
Right.
and the other is you're not safe.
That's awful. It's awful.
You doubt yourself and you don't value yourself. And so you become undeveloped that way. And you also learn to be afraid. You're afraid of other people. You're afraid of other philosophies, other kinds of information. So you kind of self censor a lot too. You don't expose yourself to very much else.
You said something there, and Sarah, you can attest to this. We had a process within our organization called exploration of meaning. It's proven to be kind of a faux process.
Hodgepodge of therapy.
I worked with enough people, and I'm sure Sarah did too, where a lot of those explorations would come down to feeling safe. So,
Or not feeling safe.
regardless of what Sarah and I did while we were in there, the concept of safety, I learned just through working through a volume of people, is a very foundational tenet or fear a lot of people have. So to hear you say that, I don't think it's an accident, I guess is what I'm driving at. And I think, depending on how clandestine you think these organizations are, that's done with extreme precision in a lot of ways, because I know they can always get people to not feel safe. And you still see it in culture today. So, and to have that go on at such an early age, I can imagine is quite a process of unraveling what's safe, what's not, and having that with your own thoughts can lead to a lot of what you experience with the trauma.
Yeah, it can be terrifying what you get taught. And as a young child, it is pretty abusive. I mean, you get taught that there is this supernatural reality that's going on concurrently with what we can see, and that it's filled with these supernatural entities, angels and demons and forces, and demons can do all kinds of things. And if you're not careful, they can affect you. So it's really pretty terrifying. And then you get told that if you engage in thinking or just learning about other ways of being, other worldviews, that you are endangering yourself. And some groups are so militant about this, like what you get told if you're a Jehovah's Witness, that if you wander outside the fold, it's extremely dangerous, that Satan is just out to get you. He's behind every bush. And so people that leave the fold are called apostate, and it's the worst kind of condemnation, and you are in grave danger at all times. But even your average evangelical Christian who leaves the fold is also very afraid, because you get told that all the things that happen to you have this spiritual meaning, and God is constantly trying to get you back. So if you can't find a job or you have trouble finding an apartment, you're having trouble with some of the independent living that you're trying to establish, then you immediately think that these are spiritual messages and that you can't make it on your own. So it's one terrifying thing after another for some time. That's why it's got this acute stage when you first leave, where it's really quite frightening.
I was just thinking about what I say to my kids when I tuck them into bed, and often it's something, it's not a by rote thing, but it's often about how much I love them. And I say, you are safe and you are loved and you are special and all these things that just could have come from my heart. I can't imagine telling my kids that they're not safe if they don't do X, Y, and Z. And that just seems so horrendous. I mean, I wasn't raised in any strong religious context. And my parents were ex-hippies, and they were, had a very loving, supportive, unconditional love stance with me. And I just my heart breaks thinking about a little kid being told the opposite, to create this dependency on a system or a doctrine or a belief or a community. It just seems so cruel to hear it laid out like that.
It definitely is.
Sarah and I were commenting how it's the basis of marketing as well now, to a lesser degree.
Just in terms of the wound that people have, whether they're religious or not, they feel like they're just not enough, right? That's just a commonality in anyone these days. It's like you need more, you need this, you need implants, you need extensions, you need all these things.
Well, they need you to feel inadequate to make you act.
Right.
And act accordingly, what they deem acceptable in different levels.
Yeah, and religious leaders usurp the role of parenting and telling parents how to be with their children. And they quote, these ancient biblical texts that say things like spare the rod, spoil the child. They promote corporal punishment. They promote telling children that they're going to be in danger if they don't give their lives to Jesus, that they might go to hell. They promote a lot of things that are really toxic. And parents, the adults, also victimize.
Yeah, we were part of what we thought was a personal development program that turned out to be the leader was using the personal development program, which was very similar to Landmark and EST and LifeSpring and those type of groups. But it was a front for him to have a harem of women. And then the final straw was that you may have seen this image, he was branding women with his initials.
Oh.
You didn't see that in the news at all?
Sometimes I'm not very up on the news.
Yeah, that's okay. And this was also 5 years ago. Just tell you really quickly. So he had us, it was supposed to be a women's sorority, and we were getting supposed to be a tattoo. And the night of, I got this, which they told me was the symbol for the 4 elements. And then later I found out it was a monogram for the leader's initials. And this was supposed to be a secret women's group. And he's basically using it to, it's very complex. I'll send you a copy of my book if you're interested. I'm sure you'll see lots of parallels.
Or Google search.
Yeah, but that we when we realized what was going on, that image was on the front page of the New York Times. That article ended up being the reason there was an investigation, and then the leader ended up getting 120 years in prison. And that case was precedent setting because it used trafficking as the backdrop for his charges. And now that case is the precedent for R. Kelly and Epstein and all these other things that are happening in these dynamics that are cultic.
What was the leader's name?
Keith Raniere.
It put a language to the abuses in a lot of ways that your quantification of the trauma does too. So, one of the things that allows these abuses to go on is that, I was saying earlier, it's harder to quantify. We like to think that our case had a lot to do with the quantifying of those terms and getting people aware of it.
Well, congratulations for getting out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to finish that story, and then I want to go back to your story. When we got out, a lot of it was documented because there was a filmmaker in our organization, and that footage ended up becoming a series on HBO called The Vow. And The Vow brought a lot of exposure to this case. And then when it was done, it was COVID when it was airing. And then people wanted to know more, which is why we decided to do a podcast. And we call it a little bit culty because we're not just pointing fingers like that's a cult or whatever it's called. But we want to look at the parallels in religion. So we've had Alice as an ex-evangelical. We've talked to ex-Jehovah's Witness, ex-Mormons, ex-Orthodox Jews. And so that obviously, speaking to you, we like to vary it between survivors and experts and whistleblowers. And there's just so many through lines. Always our format has been with somebody who's gone through it is, how did you get in? And then how did you get out?
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories,
the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. #cold pools, #crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty. So I'm going to circle back to your story, if you don't mind.
Okay.
What was the final thing, or how did you end up? We call it waking up. I don't know if you have another term for it.
That's a good one. For me, it was a process that took several years.
Mm-hmm.
My parents made the mistake of valuing education and wanting me to get good grades in school and things like that. So I read a lot, and I even wrote papers. Even in high school, I was investigating all these religious questions more so than my peers. I think some people thought I was a little off for caring so much about it instead of being more of a teenager. But anyway, I went to college, and it was funny because I was deciding between Oral Roberts University and a secular University of California, and decided on University of California because I wanted to be a witness. My friends and I, thought that we should be there because we needed to spread the word about Jesus in an environment of heathens. So there I was, and my witnessing went on for a while, but mostly I was taking courses in lots of different subjects, lots of different areas of knowledge: anthropology, history, literature, psychology. And psychology was a big thing because I learned about various frameworks for thinking about human behavior, and especially learning theory, that a lot of what we do is learned from our parents and our environment, and is a completely different explanation. The way I've described the process, it was a combination of pushes and pulls. And the pushes were things about the religion that were starting to bother me, one of which was learning about the Bible. I was finding out, I took a class in Bible as literature and learned more about where the Bible actually comes from, how it was put together, and became convinced that it really wasn't the Word of God. There was certainly the hand of humans all along the way, and I was kind of shocked at that.
Bible as literature. I just heard you say that must be like sacrilege to say for some people.
Yeah.
Bible is literature.
Yeah. And history. I took a class in Jewish history, and that was really revealing. So I became disillusioned with the Bible, and that's a very, very big deal. If you haven't got the Bible, then you're in big trouble with the whole religion. The other thing was I became pretty disenchanted with the church in the patriarchal ways that they operated. And I was becoming my consciousness was getting more raised in terms of feminism as part of my education. And at the same time, I was trying to fulfill some leadership roles at church and not being allowed to because I was female. And that bothered me a lot. And then another thing was the way that our pastor was so excited about what he considered to be signs of the end. And when there was the 6-Day War in the Middle East, he was getting all excited about that and showing the newspaper from the pulpit. More war was going to bring about the end times, and Jesus was going to come back. And so this joy about war was really kind of the last straw. I felt like just getting up and walking out. So those things were pushing me away. And then at the same time, I was having this experience of learning about alternatives from my world opening up, mostly through my education, but also just meeting more and more people and meeting people from other religions. I remember especially this one couple that were devotees of Maharishi, and they talked about how much joy and fulfillment they got from that and how their marriage had improved. All the things that we used to claim were consequences of being Christian. And so realizing, that the Christians have no monopoly on any of these aspects of human development and qualities like love and joy and peace and things that we thought we had a handle on and we're trying to share with others. So this whole combination was of pushes and pulls was going on. Oh, I also had a boyfriend and was much more interested in human relationships. My dependency on God sort of got broken as I became more close to a human being, more in touch with my body and sexuality. And so everything that was good about this world was much more appealing. So you see how these things all just kind of came together. And after a while, I just didn't want to have anything to do with the religion anymore.
When you were kind of, I guess, making that transition into the real world, you had been taught that the real world was Satan's world, correct?
Yeah, fallen.
Was it hard for you to not gaslight yourself and saying, oh, here's a boyfriend, this is Satan, this is what they're talking about?
Oh, sure. And some of I have funny stories about making out and feeling just terrible, and at the same time finding out how great it was. And then every step in the way of becoming more sexual was extremely problematic, because it was all fraught with these teachings.
Oh my goodness. Sidebar, have you been watching or have you heard of Righteous Gemstones?
No.
Oh, I think you'd love it. Or I don't know what your sense of humor is, but it's a very dark comedy about a Pentecostal family in the South. And it's a show on TV right now. We just started watching it, and I think you'd like it. I don't know. we love it.
You're getting a lot of TV assignments out of this
Yes,
podcast.
you gotta
Marlene.
Yeah. And I brought it up because there's a daughter of a very wealthy church family who's like experimenting with sexuality and has a boyfriend who's like into like devil worshiping, and
It's tongue in cheek,
but it's also very relevant, I'm sure, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I digress. Let me go back to my questions. Well, thank you for sharing your story. That's generally like our framework for our podcast with people who've been through something is how did you get in and how did you get out? The final part is how are you healing? And I can only imagine that the work that you do with clients and with retreats and everything it must be, I can only project, incredibly cathartic and healing for you. Where are you at in that journey with the work that you do? And can you tell your audience about your day-to-day life in this space?
Well, it's an ongoing process. I think it takes a lifetime. It's like other kinds of recovery, You keep on discovering new areas that you need to grow in. Early on, writing my book, it took me 4 years. There were stops and starts. I moved to Australia. I had a baby during that time. But I also spent all that time sorting through all the questions and issues that I had personally, and tried to delve into all the different issues and questions that people might have that I was clarifying for myself. And at one point, too, I remember becoming discouraged with writing the book. I mean, writing a book like that is really hard. And it was also different for me because I had been a therapist where it's all interactive with people. You do a lot of listening and you're helping them to empower them to think for themselves and so forth. And here I am writing a self-help book, which is kind of an audacious thing to do, to act like you've got something to say and that you can tell other people what to do. That was just too weird for me. So at one point I had to talk to the publisher, and they gave me an editor and helped me out with it. But I finally got through the process. But one of my realizations was that I needed to write this book for myself. It was my own spiritual journey. And if nobody read the book, if nobody was helping by it that was okay because it was something that I needed to do for myself. And that actually freed me up. That freed me up to finish it. And so it's been interesting that it really did help other people and really has. So that was almost like a bonus because it helped me so much to do that. So I have realized that there are all these different aspects of healing and growth that are important in the process, and applying those to myself and then working with clients in these different areas. I mean, there's an intellectual area. For example, knowing something about the Bible, some of those things that were intellectual for me can be hugely helpful. And to ask the questions that you've been wanting to ask, the things that you've been told are anathema to ask. That doubt is a good thing. And to go ahead and find out for your own thinking process. And then also the emotional growth and development, the recognition that you have an inner child, a very precious inner being that needs love and care, and that you can develop the adult part of yourself, the wise woman, the wise man that's going to do that self-care, that self-nurturing, and that you don't need to be outsourcing it. You don't need to be outsourcing your self-care to some imaginary being in the sky, this adult imaginary friend, that when you thought you were praying, who were you talking to? Weren't you talking to the wise part of yourself? And can you cherish and develop that? So that's this whole emotional component. And then we've learned so much in the area of trauma research to find out that trauma actually gets embedded in your body. So there's this whole physiological aspect of it that needs to be taken into account. So somebody that's getting triggered and having emotional flashbacks needs to learn something about that and how to do what I call your trigger management system. Develop your own personal trigger management system so that you know how to help yourself, how to intervene and help yourself when you are having those experiences. So it's this whole combination. It's a holistic kind of thing where you're touching on all these different aspects of your emotion and socially too. You've lost your social support network, so you have to make new friends, find new community. There's that whole social and cultural part that you have to deal with. So what's happened, and even since I wrote the book, I've realized that there are multiple dimensions to the healing and growth process.
Hey there! Hope you're enjoying this a little bit culty episode. If you're interested in more long-form culty content, check out my memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
You can get it on Amazon or listen to it on Audible or find it at most bookstores in the, quote, total badass woman in nonfiction section, which is new.
Thanks, babe. I appreciate you. And now here's a message from our sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Sarah and I were noticing one of those processes that Sarah and I had a little conversation about this morning was the amygdala hijack
Yeah.
that you spoke about. Do you mind expanding on that? Because I think it's very relevant. I just feel like it's so relevant in so many ways.
Probably for all our listeners who are
Yeah.
a lot of our listeners are recovering.
I'll give you the lay version, okay, instead of
Yep.
the highly medical technical version.
Please.
The lay version, first of all, human beings are still very ancient in some of their physiological processes. You know, you have to look at some of our behavior from an evolutionary point of view. And one of them is that safety, like you said, physical safety and security is like our bottom line, right? And in ancient times, when we were cave people, you couldn't just go walking out on the plains of Africa and feel safe and secure and go off and do your thing by yourself. It was tribal.
Still can't.
I know, we're still community oriented, but it was tribal and it was also geared toward safety as being the primary thing. And people's bodies are geared for self defense. Okay. So when you perceive a danger, you can perceive it as a life and death question, a life and death issue, even though it's not. And so we have a very natural fear response. And the fear response engages your sympathetic nervous system, and it goes straight to your amygdala and bypasses the prefrontal cortex where you do your rational thinking. And it goes to your emotions and it goes to action from those emotions. So that, for example, it's a good thing when there's a real danger. If you're out in the middle of traffic and there's a bus coming all of a sudden, you will react and run, move, get out of the way. You don't stand there thinking about it and processing it. Your body reacts, your nervous system reacts with alerting you to the danger, and the message goes straight to your amygdala where you have your emotional and your physiological reaction to that. So your sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system that goes into gear to do action, will activate, and then you'll run instead of standing there thinking about it. Right? So we have this reaction to things that we perceive as danger. And we often can perceive them as life and death kind of danger because that's how we're wired. So the important thing to realize is that it's perceived danger. And what happens is that you will remember those occasions when you have a very traumatic kind of experience, a very dangerous kind of experience. Your body registers it and remembers it because obviously for survival purposes, you would want to avoid that in the future, right? So you store this information, and then in the future, what can happen is that something will simply remind you, right? Nothing is actually happening. But let's say, you were in a car crash and you had a traumatic experience of that. You might respond in the future to the sound of metal clashing, right? And your body might just go into full alert because your brain is actually confused about what's present and what's past. And this is really important to remember that, you're getting these signals like you're supposed to engage in your self-defense because this is happening again. You think it's happening again. So your sympathetic nervous system is alert again. You've got your muscles tensing, your adrenaline and cortisol are flowing, and you actually don't really know what's happening except that you feel it in your body and you feel it in your emotions, and it feels scary and you don't know what to do. So that's why I'm saying that what you can learn is to intervene and work with yourself on this physical level to deal with the fact that your nervous system is reacting to perceived danger. That's what we call the amygdala hijack, because the information is going straight from your senses to your amygdala to alert you to react and is bypassing the prefrontal cortex where you do your rational thinking. But what you can learn is to realize what's happening when it happens and to slow down. The first thing you need to do is slow down, stop. I have a thing in my book I call a freeze frame, where the first thing is just stop. And what we've learned from the trauma research is that what you can do at that point is simply relax your body. And you can do that with a grounding exercise. You can do that with progressive muscle relaxation. But what you need to do, first of all, is relax, because that engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. And that is antithetical to the sympathetic nervous system. You can't really be doing both at the same time. You can't make a fist and also relax your arm at the very same time. So what happens when you become fully relaxed and breathe, you actually are able to get the blood flowing back to your prefrontal cortex, and you're able to actually think about it. You're actually able to think at all. So it's really a powerful thing to learn how to do. So you've put a pause on your sympathetic nervous system reacting and giving yourself a chance to think about what's going on.
For me, I really struggled with, so like, even if one of my kids jumped on me and startled me, I mean, I really felt like I was being attacked, turned into like, mama bear, like, even though it was my kid. And that really scared me, that I was so, I was ready to fight. So I understand, so just knowing that this is happening is the thing? Does the knowledge grant you the ability to stop? I know that I've had complex PTSD, but I still have the startle response. So is it just a matter of time and training, or is there other things they need to do to learn to, like, that thing you just said sounds really good, but how am I going to breathe if I'm already reacting? You know what I mean? Like, how do you interrupt if there's no time
slow
there?
it down.
Yeah,
That's what I'm hearing.
but I guess is knowing, just knowing this, is that enough to cause you to be able to slow it down, or is it just?
I think we can get much better at it. I don't think we can get 100% as far as a subtle response because, like I said, this is a primitive reaction and your body is geared for it. So you are going to have reactions. But what you can get better at is noticing when it's happening sooner, so that you can relax. This is so important. This part about relaxing your body is so important. And it's actually missing from my book because all this trauma research has gone on mainly in the last 20 years. My book is 27 years old. So I was talking about the freeze frame to stop and think about what's going on. But what I've learned since then, and I've taken trauma training since then, what I've learned more since then is this physiological part. And if you can learn to do that, then what you're doing is you're giving your brain a chance to come into the present moment and realize that you're okay, to realize that you're safe. And then you can do something I call labeling it correctly, which is to say, like, let's say I had a client who was so indoctrinated to be afraid of hell. It was just a constant fear that whenever something was extremely hot, he would go into a reaction because he would think it was hellfire, like taking the pizza out of an oven, he'd burn his finger and then just go into a reaction because that's what he was trained to think that was about. But what you can do once you've relaxed is to label it correctly and tell yourself, that's my indoctrination again, instead of that's the truth. To distinguish between truth and indoctrination and label it correctly. So any number of things can happen, like you're driving past a church. I mean, this happens to people and you get all tense and then you slow down, breathe, relax, and realize that's my indoctrination. It's not because God is calling me to go to that church. You know what I mean? There's a lot of interpretation.
But it reminded me of the time when the doctor was explaining to us which parts of the brain get developed based on what stimulus are coming in through the womb. So if it happens to be a tumultuous climate outside the womb, the lower brain functions get blood sent to them to develop them. And if it's a calm, peaceful environment, the frontal cortex gets more blood to develop it because it's coming into a peaceful world. And then the brain's being prepared versus a violent versus peaceful world. And I wonder how that relates to who's susceptible to these things once they're out in the world and whatever. But I imagine indoctrination and other things play a different role as well. But it just reminded me of that.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, we are also physiologically different, and there's such a thing as temperament from birth, to where some people are more keyed up than others and react differently to stimulus. So we do have differences. I have found that the people that struggle the most with religious trauma syndrome are people who are sensitive personalities, who were basically really serious about their religion and really passionate people that really invested in their belief system, that really got involved with their organizations, where it was like the meaning of their life, where they identified entirely with it. To have all of that fall apart is pretty traumatic for that kind of person.
Right. For people who are less invested, I can imagine that wouldn't be as traumatic. Do you see a difference in people's recovery depending on if they were born into the various church or religion, or if they chose it later in life? Is it less, I'm imagining, or is it not a factor?
Oh, it is a factor. I think it's more difficult for people that were born into it because you were fed these ideas and went through these kinds of religious practices at such a young age. I mean, our brains are not really completely formed until our early 20s, but the early years, and people talk about being told about these doctrines and these beliefs and being forced to accept it, age 5, when your brain really has no self-defense. So that's more inculcated into the brain. The other thing is that if you joined as an adult, you joined probably at a time when you were pretty vulnerable and you had some really strong needs, like you needed family, or you needed community, or you needed meaning in life, and you joined for those needs at the time. And then when you left, you basically got disillusioned and you left for a variety of reasons. But you also have a former self
Right. To go back to.
that you can return to.
Mhm.
You're not without that identity and those aspects of who you once were that you can return to. You have some personal strengths, some inner strengths that the other kind of believer doesn't have.
You just described us. Yeah, we
Yep.
went back to
Yep.
ourselves, and
Yep.
Nippy and I both woke up pretty quickly when we saw the truth. Back to what you were just speaking about in terms of that really helpful technique to ground. Are there other things that you recommend to your clients to access the parasympathetic nervous system as a daily practice, like outside of being triggered?
Yeah, I think that it is a good practice to know how to relax, to learn to meditate and know how to be in the moment. I mean, it's interesting that meditation has been a practice in lots of traditions, and it's largely the practice of being able to be present. To the extent that you're good at being present, and that also speaks to the ability to enjoy pleasure, to be in the moment and not be constantly somewhere else. These are like skill sets that can be developed. The other thing that, as far as the emotional part, that I emphasize is that your basic primary relationship is with yourself. And so how do you do that? I mean, how do you hug yourself? How do you self nurture? One way that I think works really well and that I've used a lot with clients is this idea of having an inner child and having an inner adult, having the wise adult self taking care of the child, who I think represents your basic needs and your basic feelings and is this innocent, precious self that needs caring for. And so a lot of what you can do relates to developing this relationship so that you know how to talk to yourself. We have a lot of voices in our heads going on all the time, but how about learning to use those voices in a productive way instead of just randomly or the negative self-talk? The negative self-talk can be pretty strong and pretty vicious.
Right.
Yeah, it's harsh. It can be harsh. Yep.
And I've called it the idea monster because it's more than just an inner critic. It's more than just a negative self-talk or cognitive behavioral systems. It can be dangerous. It can kill you if you don't master it. I just got through doing a talk called Taming Your Monster for the conference on religious trauma the other day, because this voice that you can have in your head that tells you you're going to hell, or you're a bad person, or you can't do this and can't do that, is a really serious, haunting kind of voice that needs to be dealt with. And there are strategies for doing that.
It has a toxic energy to it, for sure.
Yeah. And then, clearing the space for you to then talk to your child and comfort your child and learn self-soothing and self-comfort, because that's what's required sometimes.
That's definitely something that we could both work on. I know that you've written about Christianity as being rife with crazy making, which probably doesn't make you super popular in certain circles. And but it also seems like you've been clear to say not all Christianity is fundamentalism and not all religion is either. What do you want people to know who might be quick to label you as anti-Christian or anti-religion in terms of the goal of your work?
I don't have a problem with spirituality, which I think can be understood very, very differently. And I don't have a problem with communities, churches that provide community and support and respect individuals as having differences and respect people to think for themselves and feel for themselves, and that do not dwell on the supernatural, but are humanistic and naturalistic. I think that there are communities like that, and there are churches like that. And that if you do want a church community, that there are some important questions to ask when you're visiting a place or a group of people to see whether they measure up to some of those criteria. Okay? Because sometimes a church will claim, to have that kind of respect, and they really don't. They're really still into conformity and authoritarianism, and that's what you have to watch for. So there are toxic beliefs and toxic practices that need to be understood, and so those need to be avoided. But plenty of people benefit from groups that are much more supportive than that.
And anyone's listening who's just getting out of fundamentalist anything, what's your number one piece of advice for them, or what would you want them to know? Other than read your book, of course, which we'll put in the show notes.
I think my bottom line message to people that are coming out is to have hope. There is hope. There is healing. There is growth. People that are, instead of survivors, I call them reclaimers.
That was my last question.
Love that. Yeah, I
You're
love that.
reclaiming
Yeah.
your life. And we were talking about people that joined later and can reclaim their earlier identities. No, everybody can reclaim.
Yes, reclaimers. Will you just explain to us how you came up with that and what that means to you?
Well, I have this ongoing support group that is international. You can go find out about it at journeyfree.org. But people that are in it are people that are recovering from all sorts of different religious and other backgrounds. And we call them reclaimers because you're reclaiming your life, you're reclaiming yourself, your identity, you're reclaiming everything about you. And it's still there. There's hope. You can grow and heal, and it's not your fault, and it's not a hopeless situation.
That's such good advice. I really always try to remember that in dark moments. And a friend said that to me right at the beginning, that you'll in 6 months, you'll look back and see how far you've come, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think offering people that hope is such a service, and the work you do is such a service. And I know we come from different backgrounds, but there's so many parallels that it's such a treat to talk to you and to learn from you. And that's the joy of this podcast for us, is that we get to have these conversations. And like you said with your book, I selfishly get to grow so much and have these moments, these cathartic moments, but then also share it with our audience. So on behalf of them and everyone recovering and all the reclaimers out there, thank you for your time. It means a lot to us.
You're welcome. And keep up the good work. You guys are doing a great thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that, Marlene. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Marlene.
Until next time. Marlene, 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 Marlene. You really dropped some wisdom on us. Yeah. Is that bad?
Wow. Oh my God.
Please don't leave us just because you can. You should see the look that Nippy's giving me right now.
No, I'm just witnessing it all, taking it all in.
Marlene, you really dropped some wisdom on us. Leaving a controlling religion can really be so wounding. So if you're listening and this has happened to you, and anything she talked about or we talked about with her stirred things up for you, just take a sec, take a deep breath. Healing shit is hard. It really is. You're doing great.
See our show notes for links to Marlene's site, and we've also got some recovery resources on alittlebitculty.com. And do tell us, if you feel inclined, what you think about that episode, culty listeners. Let her rip over on Instagram or leave us a voicemail over on littlebitculty.com. And who knows, maybe you'll hear your own voice coming back through whatever speakers or headphones you're listening to on this podcast very soon.
We will be diving deeper over on Patreon, unpacking and playing some more of those voicemails, answering more questions. Also, a reminder that we have a bunch of new sponsors this year. Supporting our sponsors by using culty discount codes, which are posted on our website, helps keep this podcast going. So if you're interested in any of the things we've mentioned, Organifi, BetterHelp, Viore, Splendid Spoon, all those things, check out our website and you'll see our special links. Press them, get a discount, support the pod. Again, thank you everyone who's joined us over on Patreon. We are having a lot of fun over there, posting behind-the-scene contents.
Sarah lets her hair down, doesn't she, on Patreon? She just really does. Just really
So do
kicks
you,
back
Nippy.
and just unwinds. Glass of wine. Just so great.
Everyone loves Nippy's impression. And I hope someone is listening to this episode of the boombox hoisted high over their heads, John Cusack style. And you guys really do rock. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped Nexium, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife,
and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.